This documentary is brought to you live from the Bill Jeffrey Sound Studios and Brewery in Clontarf, Queensland. Narrated by me, Ron Dingwall. About the middle of 1950, Len Tuart was contacted by the South Australian Government Publicity Department to provide transportation, supplies, etc. for a group of students and their teachers from Knox Grammar School, just northwest of Sydney. This was to take them from the Finke railway siding across to Ayers Rock and then on to Alice Springs. This is a scan of Knox Grammar School right now. In September 1950, Len and I loaded a 1938 Rio Speedwagon, 18-seater side-loading coach, and an ex-Army two-wheel drive Chevrolet Blitz on a goods train to go down to the Finke railway siding. There we met Ozzie Andrews, who owned Curtin Springs Cattle Station, and he was to accompany us to Ayers Rock carrying supplies in his 3-ton Ford truck. This is still more of a scan of the Knox Grammar School in Sydney. This is one of Mr. Erskine. He was the leader of the group. It took quite a few months and a lot of organisation to get the whole thing together, as various permission was to be obtained from the Aboriginal Affairs Department, from all kinds of to setting up a radio, from the PMG to set up a transmitter receiver. Here they are looking at the map of the route that they were going to take. It was from the Finke through Eldunda, across to Curtin Springs, then to Ayers Rock itself. The road, the first part of the road wasn't bad, but from then on it was virtually just a track through the sand dunes. They originally had thought they would need to use camels to get through there as the terrain was so bad, but Len told them that the old Rio would be the best way to go. Didn't turn out that way, but still we got there. This is them leaving in Kingsford Smith Airport, all getting ready to leave. I believe they flew to Melbourne and they flew from there to Adelaide, and then they spent about a week in Adelaide. They were entertained by various government officials and taken around to see the sights, etc. It was a really big event at the time, and it was in a lot of the newspapers. They carried reports of it. Here they are cranking up the old prop jet. Here's a DC-3. I think they were leaving from Melbourne going through to Adelaide on it. The old DC-3s were used mostly in those days. Len Tuart also had the TAA agency in Alice Springs. Here they are at one of the signposts at one of the train stops. Here they are getting on the old GAN. The TAA DC-3s used to land at used to leave Adelaide, land at Mount Eva, then Oodnadatta, Alice Springs, Tennant Creek, Catherine and Darwin. This is, I believe at Coward Springs, is kind of a sulphur pool there. Or it could be the water supply. This is a train in the background. Trains used to stop pretty well for any reason. Often they would need repairs or break down or just stop because the guys like to have a break. Here they are unloading all their gear at the Finke. There's no railway station at the Finke other than a sign that says Finke Railway Station, but there's no building there. Just a hotel and I believe a store and several houses. I don't really know what they do there. Here's a young man obviously waiting for somebody to come and pick up his bags, and finally realised he wasn't back in Sydney. There's the old Blitz that I drove, two-wheel drive unfortunately. Here we are loading supplies onto Ozzie Andrews' truck from the Ghan. They had a whole bunch of stuff. That's Len Tuitt with his back to us in the khaki shirt. That's me with a sweater and blue shirt. Here they are unloading mashed potatoes. More stuff going on. They bought an enormous amount of gear. Here they are all sitting up on the truck. Some of them rode in the coach, but most of them rode up on the back of the truck. That's Ozzie Andrews leaving the Fink and heading out west. That's me leaving with the Blitz and the two-wheel Jeep trailer. Here we are having lunch, I think at Bloodwood Boar, I believe it was the name of the first stop we stayed. It took 3.5 days to get from the Fink to Ayers Rock. I think we travelled 160 miles the first day, but from then on it was pretty hard going. Here they are pushing the old Chevy Blitz. This was actually at Earl Dunder Homestead, owned by Sid Staines at the time. All the area around there was very soft sand, all in that surrounding countryside. My brother George and I were going south, and we broke down about 30 miles from, that's the old Rio coach down there to the windmill, and even there the Blitz got bogged. But George and I got bogged. We broke an axle. Oh, that's Curtin Springs Homestead, what Ozzie Andrews had. It was only about 4 years old, and it was a further station west of the railway. And that's some humpies where the blacks live. Yeah, George and I spent about 5 days near there, where we broke down an old Chev truck. That's Mount Connor. That's on Ozzie Andrews Station, which measured about 60 mile by about 20 mile. Quite a unique looking mountain, really. Here's Ozzie coming along with his Ford truck with the students on top. We never gained any high speed, so they were pretty safe. That's Len in the middle between the two students there. And here we are at the rock. We had really good weather the whole time we were there. Very cold of a night, but quite warm of a daytime. It was really interesting waking up in your swag out amongst the spinifex and watching the red line rise from the bottom of the rock, or rather from the top of the rock, and as it came down, as the sun came up, the red line came down the rock, and very distinct. Pretty good colours for a 45, 50-year-old film. You see the contrast between the rock and the blue sky there. Not a lot of growth around, few trees, but not a lot of growth. This was winter time, September, so it was about the best time of the year. This was the transmitter receiver that they assembled. They were given permission by the post office to set this up. It was the receiver was provided by Amalgamated Wireless Sydney on loan, and the antenna was built by British Tube Mills in South Australia, which they rigged up, but they had to get a battery was power was supplied by a 12-volt battery, and they had a little gasoline generator driving it to charge the battery. Their first contact was Wave Hill, which is about 700 miles from where they were, so they were pretty excited about that. Then they got through to the flying doctor, and they were able to send telegrams more or less exactly like a regular post office. They were able to send telegrams and receive them. That's the little generator on the left there. They sent hundreds of telegrams. They had a lot of airtime, but they felt they needed the radio because of at that time they didn't know what they were getting into out there, and they thought there might have been wild tribes of Aborigines and might need help in a hurry, I guess. Some months later, Mrs. Pearl Tuitt and I took out 7 retired, that's Maggie Springs there, the main source of water, took 7 retired lady school teachers out to Ayers Rock and in a small Bedford bus, but we were gone about 3 weeks, we didn't have anything at all, and I don't believe Len ever received permission from the Native Affairs to do that trip, but Len Tuitt was like that. He didn't obey the rules very much, didn't care for them. This is them experimenting with different bugs and plants. They were all into biology and all the different experiments with plants. Here they are again carrying out tests with the. They must have done a lot of research into what to bring and what they were going to do. It would have taken them awful lot of planning, months of planning, I would imagine. But they all seem to be well occupied every day. I can't remember what I was doing, but they all seem to be well occupied in all of their activities. Beautiful sunrises and sunsets, real color in the clouds. The rock also creates a lot of its own wind patterns, like the tall buildings in a city when they create different wind shifts. You can see the blue sky against the red rock with the different contrast. There's a brain, what they call the brain, a scan of the brain on the side of Ayers Rock, one of the more well-known landmarks on it. Most of it looks pretty well the same. It's about 1,100 feet high, and I think it was 5 miles around it, if I remember correctly. It was pretty easy to run over it with sand shoes on. You could scoot up all around it. Most of the students were about 16 years old, which was how old I was at the time, and we were kind of running all over the place like ants. That's one of the caves there where the cave paintings were. Mountford kept all his photographic supplies in there because it was a cool place to keep them. Of course, all the caves were wide open, then you could go wherever you wanted at that time. That's a section of the rock, they call it the tail, or the root tail, I believe. Very steep in some places, almost vertical, straight out of the ground. It must have been a real oasis for some of the blacks to come there where there was fresh drinkable water and the caves for protection out of the elements. Here's another scan of the brain. These are different berries on the trees. This was one of the major things that they were examining and documenting. Although Mountford, I believe, had been out before. Charlie Mountford had led an expedition out there one time before. This is the desert oak or casuarina tree. Very interesting to hear the wind whistle through them. This is a sturt pea. It's very, very common right throughout the centre. Very pretty red. Pretty well across the centre of Australia, I believe. Very colourful. This is some of the students. That's Len Tuart on the left there, you see now. Young Len Tuart. That's Mount Olga across there. We were unable to get across there. We tried to get through, even deflating the tyres, but we weren't able to get over the sandhills, which must have been very disappointing for the students. Here they are climbing the rock for the first time. These are some fires that Charlie Mountford lit out in the spinifex to attract the Aborigines, to get them to come in. We never saw any at all going to the rock. There's a picture of some of the furrows of the rock. We never saw any blacks at all around there at all. So apparently that was some kind of signal, but about a dozen of them came in. That's Ozzy Andrews standing there with the binoculars with his back to us. reaching for the hat there. He was a real character, always ready for a joke. Very funny. The furrows are about 15 feet deep, roughly. Here they are coming back down. You had to take it pretty easy because it could kind of get away from it. And some of the shale at that time was still a little bit, some of it was loose and would break away. So you had to be pretty careful. That's looking down at the ground. Aussie's truck down at the bottom. You got a really good view from up there, but although there wasn't that much to see except the ogres. That's the camp where we camped, the main camp near Maggie Springs. Here's some chaps looking around. There's some more fires there. It really worked because that evening the blacks came into the camp. They left the women outside and two young boys who weren't initiated. This was a tape recorder. They were going to record the sound of the corroboree, which would have been interesting, but it didn't work, so that wasn't successful. There was no record of the corroboree that they put on because lights, we couldn't use any lights, of course, so we had the light of the fire, but it wasn't enough for cameras. Here they are doing their daily activities. They were able to obtain quite a few Aboriginal bits and pieces. Oh, this David Granger, he's the guy who took the films. I got to know him fairly well. I was interested in photography. His father was a prominent dentist, and he also became one, and he died in the United States, died of cancer. This is a guy with a Geiger counter, but testing for radioactivity. You can see the red dirt there, how red it is. And these are the cave paintings. Colours came out very well, very clear. Some of the Aborigines went around with us and explained some of the old stories about them. They didn't, the two young guys who hadn't been initiated that weren't with them, they apparently weren't allowed to accompany them. Each picture has its own story, apparently. I don't know what the guy on the right, what his stories was. This was one day I took about 8 or 10 students and 3 or 4 blackfellas out about 6 miles out from the rock where they were going to demonstrate their hunting abilities and how they tracked different animals or how they collected food. This is showing them how to throwing a spear with a woomera, which gave it a lot of leverage and propelled the spear a long distance, but it was also used for a digging tool and or even as a weapon, I guess, for killing animals, changing tires, that sort of thing. They were fairly accurate. It was surprising how quickly they could, how accurate they were with them. I gave them some food and some flour and water and, to make a damper with, also some canned meat. I made the mistake of also trying to make a damper, and not being experienced, it came out totally black and totally raw inside, which was a bit embarrassing. But theirs came out a nice grey brown. Here he is digging a hole amongst the ashes. They get it to a certain temperature, and then they pat it in there. Then they cover it with the ashes. But obviously, it can't be too hot. Just hot enough to bake it, really. Here they are heating up, using the warmer again to heat up a piece of wood, get it very hot with the friction. Here he is either flicking a bick or a match or doing something, and then they are heating it up again. They were still very primitive at this age, and they're mostly nomads and living the way they had for thousands of years. They hadn't changed a whole lot at this time. There is getting the very, very fine dry grass. It doesn't take much to get it to light because it's so fine and dry. Here they are tracking through the red sand. The tiniest little mark they'll pick up and be able to trace it, whereas normally, unless you'd learned over the years, you would never know, you'd never take any notice of it, but they could pick it up and follow it and shove their hand into the sand and pull out a lizard where you would think there wasn't anything at all. There's the rock in the background. Here he is digging for grubs. There he is putting some witchetty grubs on the ground. There'd be nothing. The earth would look totally normal on the top, but they could detect what was under there. Here he is tracking down a lizard, learning some bad habits. They did put on some clothes for this occasion. That's lens mate on the left. They did put on some clothes for this occasion, but mostly they didn't. Maybe wore a shirt, that was about all. Here he is holding a lizard that he'd picked up. There's one there that just wearing an old army shirt. When Mrs. Tuitt and I took the 7 ladies out to Ayers Rock a few months later, we came back up through a creek, and it could have been this one. They all look alike, but it could have been this one that was standing with his wife and a bunch of spears and a bunch of kangaroo dogs, just wearing an army shirt and nothing else, which really impressed the ladies in the group. This is the New York Explorers Club flag, which is issued to only 2 people in Australia, Charles Percy Mountford and